All right. Good afternoon to everybody. We will continue with our discussion on the existence of God. In my last week discussion, I discussed what is called ontological argument for the existence of God. And also I explained to you why the attributes of God and also the existence of God are very important for us to understand theistic religion. Now, when we try to understand theistic religion, the central conception is God. So, if you understand that concept very well, then of course you understand much of the theistic religion. And early we discussed the attributes of God. Attribute means the adjectives with which we can describe God. Now, when we come to this topic, the existence of God, we are trying to study the arguments presented by theologians in order to prove the existence of God. Now, you know, the important thing is this. In a theistic religion, it is very important that God is a real person, real being, because you don't see God. So, but on the other hand, the religion you are following is centered around the conception of God. So therefore, if you are not sure that God is real, you know, you don't feel following the religion. So therefore, the proving the existence of God has been one of the most important things in theistic religion. Now, for ordinary people like Jews, Christians, Muslims, they just go by the book. In the Old Testament or New Testament, in Quran, you have the story of God. People accept it as it is. Now, that story of God is the story of a God as a person, right? God as a person. So God is, the talking to Abraham, and God is active. God is reacting to what human beings do. He gets mad, he gets jealous, and like that. But then philosophically, God is not defined in that manner. Philosophically, God is defined as some kind of universal principle, not as a being, not as a person. So, here there is important difference of perception. According to the book, ordinary people understand God to be the protector, creator, and also as a person. But philosophically, you have the conception of God as universal principle. So these two things you have to keep in your mind. And the other important thing is proving the existence of God. God really exists, has very important significance to these religions. Because if people don't see God, people don't accept God, then the issue is that how do you follow that religion? So therefore, that is why the people have come up with different types of arguments. Now, in the last week, we discussed what is called ontological argument of God. The ontological argument of God tries to prove the existence of God purely by a logical argument, purely by a logical argument. Now, if we look at that argument very carefully, you can see that that argument has problems. I will summarize and refresh. In order to refresh your memory, I will give that argument again to you. When we say that, it goes something like this. You say God is God is perfect being. Perfection, let me see. Can you see that? Existence is perfection. Now first we say God is the perfect being. Existence is a perfection. How you define God. So this whole argument is based on how you define God. So define God as a perfect being. And then you say existence is a perfection. Okay. Then you say God exists. So now when you look at this argument has some serious logical problems. Now one thing is, you remember last week I said, when it says existence is a perfection, to exist is to perfect thing. I said from a Buddhist point of view it can't be, right? From Buddhist point of view, we can't say existence is a perfection. According to Buddhist point of view, say existence means in Pali language, bhava. Bhava is not a perfection thing, okay? To exist in the samsara is dukkha. Everybody knows it, right? So to exist in the samsara is dukkha. So from that point of view, we can say that according to Buddhism, existence is not a perfection, okay? So now even though God has existence, so it is not a perfection. So then we can say that it is not a perfect thing. So therefore, the perfect being cannot have existence. That is one way to respond to this argument. Now there is another logical problem, logical difficulty even more than that. Now when we say God is perfect, okay. Now actually we start with saying God is perfect, and then we try to prove God exists. If you look at carefully, you can see that whenever we say God is perfect, then we have already assumed the existence of God. Now if we don't assume the existence of God, how can we say that God is perfect? We already assume. What it means is like, I will give you an example. If I say that this pen is red, now I say that this pen is red, but when I say this pen is red, I cannot say this pen is red if this pen doesn't exist, right? If this pen is not real, how can you say that this pen is red? So the moment I say this pen is red, I have said two things. This pen is real and it is red. Do you see the point? Now every time we say God is perfect, we already say that there is somebody called God and he is perfect. Look, it's very interesting. We cannot talk about any particular thing without assuming it is existence. I can talk about the pen because pen is real. Then I can say pen is tall, pen is lean, pen is red, pen is good. All kinds of things I can say a thing about. Adjectives like perfect. If I say red, long, short, good, bad, all these things are adjectives, descriptions. But to have those descriptions, we have to have this thing as a real thing. Okay? So when I say God is perfect, you already have assumed God exists. Now starting from here, look at your conclusion. Your conclusion is also the same. Okay? You start God is perfect, so then you say that God exists. And then you say it is something like this. Okay, God exists. And then you say God is existing, therefore God is perfect. You see, we start from something and then we come back to it. because we say God is perfect. Now when we say perfect, by definition, according to this definition, perfection has existence. Now here we say exist. Okay? So from here to we come here, and again from here to we go here, and again we come here. Now in logic, this is called circular argument. Okay? Circular argument. Circular, you go round go in a round. You go in a circle. Okay? Now circular argument is a very poor argument, because in other words what you do is you already assume what you want to prove. You can't start by saying God is perfect unless God exists. But then what you are trying to do, you are trying to prove that God exists. So what you want to prove, in other words, your conclusion, you assume in your premises. So circular argument means, in other words, circular argument means is something like this: assuming the conclusion in the premises. Now premise means, now in argument we have conclusion and then we have premises. So we say this is conclusion. Now these three are, we say, premises. Now in argument we give premises to support an argument. Okay? Based on these things we draw this conclusion. But the interesting thing is you already have the conclusion here. So then this is a logically weak thing, circular argument. In logical language we also use another term for that, circular argument. Also we say sometimes begging the question. Begging the question. In logic we say begging the question. You beg the question means same thing. You argue in a circular. In other words, circular argument, begging the question, both mean that you are already assuming your conclusion, assuming the conclusion you want to prove. Now you can't have an argument like that. So therefore ontological argument is problematic for several reasons, but mainly it is problematic because logically, whenever you say God is perfect, we already accept that God exists. I mean, that is the way it is. It's like, again, when I say pen is red, you don't have to ask whether pen exists. Because pen is real, I say that pen is red. So the moment you say pen is red, you accept that pen is real. Same way, the moment you say God is perfect, you accept that God is there. Otherwise, how can you say that God is perfect? Now, you know, this argument is little bit, it's not a very difficult argument, but you have to really think about it carefully to understand it, okay? So, in other words, if you want to prove the existence of something, if you want to know whether something exists, you can't do that logically. You have to do that empirically. Empirically means if you want to know whether some animal or somebody exists, you have to look around and see whether that person or animal exists. How can you prove otherwise? So you cannot prove the existence of something simply by logic. Okay? Simply, you can't prove something simply by logic, because you really have to look around, look in the world, whether that person or that thing exists. But the moment we add adjectives, moment we say it is good, we already assume that it exists. We say this boy is tall. You don't have to prove that boy exists, because he is existing. We say he is tall. Okay? Now here the problem is the moment you say God is a perfect being, we already assume that God exists. Okay. Now this was the argument we discussed last week, ontological argument, try to prove the existence of God. Now this argument is very old. The Saint Anselm who presented this argument lived in the 11th century, like more than now it is 2000, so more than 1000 years ago. But in philosophy this argument has been commented by many people because logically it is an interesting argument to see. Looks like okay, you can prove the existence of God without any trouble. But when you look at the argument carefully, you can see that this argument has problems. So basically, this argument of what we call ontological argument is an effort to prove the existence of God by simply by logic, not with reference to anything, anything in the world. So this is okay. This is one of the arguments we discussed last week. That's why I say ontological argument depends totally on the definition of the concept of God as the perfect being. But the problem is, how is it possible to attribute existence or reality simply by definition? Many philosophers have commented on this argument. Immanuel Kant's criticism is well known. He rejected it by showing that existence is not an attribute like any other. Now what it means is really, you can say this pen is red, this pen is long, this pen is good. All these are attributes. But existence is not an attribute like that. You can't say this pen is real. It has to come differently. But if the pen is real, then you can attribute many things into it. It is whether it is good or bad, long or short, beautiful or not, and all these things you can add. Okay. So in other words, Kant's critique was that existence is not an attribute. If you want to attribute something, first you have to prove that person exists. You can't attribute existence simply to non-existing things. So his example was, one cannot add currency notes to any imaginary currency notes. Like, if this pen is not real, you can't write with that. Okay, same thing. You can't add anything to it. His example was, you take imaginary currency notes, non-existing currency notes, and then can you add real ones to that? No, because there is nothing to add. So, like that. In other words, the difference between attributes or adjectives, we describe something, and the existence of that particular thing are totally two different things. Okay, this is what we looked at last time, ontological argument. Today I would like to move into some other argument. This is also a very well-known argument presented by, initially this argument was presented by Plato, and then, like in the early Greek philosophy, but not to prove the existence of Christian concept of God. But the Aristotle, Plato and Aristotle thought that this kind of argument has to be there in order to explain the world. But then that argument was borrowed by Christian theologians. This argument tries to prove the existence of God from the existence of the world or universe. It was presented in three different formulations by St. Thomas Aquinas, the leading medieval Catholic thinker. St. Thomas Aquinas is like Venerable Buddha Ghosha to Buddhism. Like he is the main, the interpreter of Catholic religion. Now he comes up with three different arguments. One is the argument of unmoved mover. The things in the world are moving and changing. Whatever in motion must have been put into motion by another thing. in motion. Aquinas says that this process cannot go ad infinitum. Ad infinitum means infinitely, endlessly. That's a Latin term. So there must be some first mover who is unmoved by any, but who moves the rest. Now you know this concept of unmoved mover. Now it means, now if you take everything in the universe, everything is moving, right? How do you understand this? Okay, we are in this hall, we are not moving. Then how do we say that everything is moving? Actually what it means is that you take all the objects in the universe like sun, moon, earth, all these are moving, right? Sun is moving, earth is moving, planets are moving, moon is a planet, is moving. Now you know everything is moving. Question is, who moved it? Because you know, a thing cannot move itself. Okay? So any object that is moving has to be moved by somebody else. Another moving object. So when you say that, okay, we say that this is an object, so this is being moved by A. Okay, A moves, now this is we say X, okay. Now X is moved by A. Then the question is, who moves A? Then you have to say, okay, this is A, and then A moves X, and of course we have B moving A, and then who moves B? Then we have C moving, you know, like that. So who moves X? A. Who moves A? B. Who moves B? C. Now, and then, yes, it goes to you say ad infinitum, endlessly. It goes endlessly. Why? Because you can ask, okay, who moved that? Somebody. Who moved that? Something else. Now, Aristotle's argument initially was, Aristotle said that this can't go on like that. There must be some prime mover, original mover, which is not moving, but which moves other things. So in other words, there must be what is called first mover. Now first mover is unmoved. Unmoved in the sense, the first mover is not moved by anybody else. Okay? Do you get the point? Everything in the universe is moving. Although we don't feel this earth is, we are also moving. That is how sun setting, sun rising, and then after 365 days, one circle is over. But we are moving, you know, we go like this. We are moving. And then, so the motion is, who moved us? Somebody else. Who moved that thing? Something else. Who moved that thing? Something else. You know, it goes on and on and on and like that. But then Aristotle said that, no, you can't go like that endlessly. There must be some beginning point where there should be something that moves other things, but itself is not moving. Because if it is moving, then we have to ask the question, who moved that? Okay? Therefore, he says, this first mover is something unmoved. It is not moving, but it gives motion to all the other things. That is what is called unmoved mover. Or same thing you can say, first mover. Okay? Now, the things in the world are moving. Whatever in motion must have been put into motion by another thing in motion. Aquinas says that this process cannot go ad infinitum. So there must be some first mover who is unmoved by any, but who moves the rest. Now, initially, actually, this argument is not Aquinas' argument. This argument is Aristotle's argument. Okay? Aristotle is the one who, you know, who clearly articulated it. But then Aristotle's argument was borrowed or accepted by Christian theologians to prove the existence of God, because they thought that Aristotle proved the existence of first mover. The Christian theologian did was, they said that, oh yes, the first mover is God. So that's what they did. So the Aristotle established that there is a concept of first mover, unmoved mover, and then Christian theologians said that yes, there must be a first mover in the universe, and that first mover is God. So you see, Aristotle's concept of unmoved mover or first mover was borrowed by Christian theologians, and they used that Aristotle's argument in order to prove the existence of God. Okay, so the unmoved mover. So this argument is based on the concept of moving. Now we know that the concept of moving is a real thing, because everything in the universe are moving. So the question is again, who gave the motion? Okay, and then also it is necessary that first there must be a first mover. Otherwise, there is no end to it. It goes on and on and on and on. So then Aristotle said, no, it can't be like that. It has to stop somewhere. So that is what is called first mover. And then first mover should be something not moving. Because if the first mover is moving, we can ask the same question about the first mover. Who moved the first mover? So first mover is not moving, but first mover can move other things. So this is the concept of unmoved mover. Or you can say the concept of first mover. So they said that first mover is God. Okay. Do you understand the point? Do you understand it? Like this is now early argument, ontological argument is nothing like that. It is purely based on the definition. But here, in order to prove God, we are going to the world, right? We are looking at the universe, we are looking at the world, and then we are looking at the nature of the world. Now movement is nature in the world. So we are using that in order to prove the existence of God. That is the concept of unmoved mover. So again, the simple argument is, if the things in the world are moving, they must have been moved by something else. Those something else should have been moved by something else, and so on. So therefore, there must be a first mover which is not moved by anything else. So Aquinas presented this argument to prove the existence of God. So the cosmological argument means, cosmology means the study of the cosmos. Cosmos means the universe. So this argument comes from the nature of the universe. In other words, it says that God created the world and God started them moving. This is the idea. And then similar thing is uncaused cause, second one. All things have causes. There cannot be anything which is the efficient cause, cannot change itself but can change others. So there cannot be anything which is the efficient cause of itself. If anything is self-caused, it must be prior to itself, which is impossible. The causal process cannot go indefinitely. Therefore, there must be a first cause, first cause, not D, first cause, which is not caused by any other cause. So God is the uncaused cause of the universe. Now this argument is also very similar to the argument of unmoved mover. This is the first cause or uncaused cause. Now everything in the universe has cause, right? If we agree with that, everything has a cause. Now what it says is, there cannot be anything which is the efficient cause of itself. Now you can't have anything which is the cause of itself. Okay? If you really try to understand it clearly, you can see that if you say that X cause itself, then X has to be prior to itself in order to cause. Now that is nonsense, right? That's why it says, if anything is self-caused, it must be prior to itself. Because if you say about x, if you say x cos x, something like this, if you say x cos x, now in order to cause x, x has to be before x. Can it be like that? Because you say that x cos x, self-cause. You remember in the similar thing in the Sanyutta Nikaya, Achelakassapa Sutta, Achelakassapa asked from the Buddha, Sayang Katan Dukkhanti. Remember? Achelakassapa asked, Sayang Katan Dukkhanti. Whether dukkha is self-caused. Sayang Kata. Sayang Kata means caused by oneself. Whether dukkha is caused by itself. Now, Buddha says, no, that is wrong. Mahevang, don't say so. But actually, Buddha doesn't accept that. But if you say dukkha is self-caused, then dukkha is causing dukkha. Now, in order to cause dukkha, dukkha has to be before dukkha. But then it becomes impossible. Because how can something be before it? Okay? Something, to create something, it has to be before it. It is impossible. If anything is self-caused, it must be prior to itself, which is impossible. And then we go to the causal process cannot go indefinitely. Now again it is like this. We say x caused by A caused by B caused by C caused by D. And we have to go on and on and on and on, there is no finish, end. Therefore, Aristotle, this argument is also from Aristotle. He said that there must be a first cause. That first cause has to be uncaused cause. In itself, it is not caused by anything, but it is the cause of everything else. Okay? That is the idea. Uncaused cause means it is not caused by anything else, but it causes everything else in the universe. Uncaused cause. So, this idea originally again presented by Aristotle to explain the world. So, he thought that causal process, causality, cannot go indefinitely. Causality must stop at some point. And then therefore there must be the first cause, which is not caused by any other cause. So God is the uncaused cause of the universe. Uncaused cause means actually the same argument we can call first cause. First cause or uncaused cause. So the first cause is not caused by anything else. And then, but that cause can be the cause of everything else. So this initially Aristotelian argument is absorbed into the Christian theology, and then they said that God is the uncaused cause. So cosmological argument has different presentations. One thing is unmoved mover. So the God as the unmoved mover, and also God as the uncaused cause. So the first cause, first mover, that is the idea. And then God as the necessary being. In the world there are things that may or may not exist. They are called contingent things. Even the universe is contingent. This means that there can be moments when nothing exists. These contingent things cannot come into being on their own. They need for their existence some necessary being who exists eternally. God is that necessary being. Okay, God is the necessary being. Now this comes from the idea of contingent and necessary. Contingent and necessary. So there can be contingent things, okay? or contingent beings, and then necessary thing or necessary being. What is the meaning of this thing? Contingent things, necessary thing. Now look at it again. In the world there are things that may or may not exist. They are called contingent things. Contingent thing means there are things that are contingent on others, depending on others. They could exist or could not exist. Even the universe is contingent. Universe doesn't have to exist. This means that there can be moments when nothing exists. If everything is contingent, there can be moment in the universe, nothing existing. These contingent things cannot come into being on their own. Now, how can the contingent thing come into being? Now, for example, if you take this pen is made of plastic. If plastic is not there, pen is not there. Now, in order to say plastic to exist, there must be some chemical things. Those chemical things don't exist, plastic doesn't exist. Then we go to chemical things. How do the chemical things exist? Chemical things exist also based on even more fundamental things. Like that, everything is depending on many things. Okay? Everything is depending on many things. You take a piece of cloth you are wearing. That piece of cloth doesn't exist like that. It depends on other things. Maybe cotton. Cotton depends on the cotton tree. Cotton tree depends on something else. So like that, everything is contingent. Contingent means their existence is depending on other things. We exist because of our parents. Our parents existed because of their parents. Their parents existed because of their parents. And like that, okay? It goes on like that. So the contingent. But then, now things are contingent means in the universe there can be some moment, some occasion, nothing existing. Nothing existing. Then the question is, if there is a moment that nothing exists, how could these things arise? So the argument is, if the universe is full of contingent things, there must be at least one necessary things. That necessary things has to be there all the time. So if the necessary thing is there, contingent things can follow from the necessary things. Now if you look at carefully again, you can see that we are going back to the creation of God. Now God created the world. So, but before the world, God existed. Otherwise, how can God create the world? In order to create the world, God has to exist. So, God was existing before. So then God created universe. Now, this argument is this contingent things and necessary things is basically again cosmological argument in another way. But of course, it is also very strongly logical argument also. So God as the necessary being. So the whole idea is that all things can be divided into necessary and contingent. So the contingent things exist because of the necessary things. Now what is the necessary thing that is the cause for all the contingent things? According to this argument, it is God. So God exists as a necessary being in the universe. So therefore from God all the other things arise. Okay, now this argument is called cosmological argument. It's based on cosmology. Cosmology means the study of the universe. Now argument comes from the nature of the universe. First one was unmoved mover or first mover. In the universe, things are moving because something else has moved them. Ultimately, when you look for the motion of each thing, according to this view, we go and end up with God. God is the one who really gave the motion to everything. And then uncaused cause is also the same thing. God is the cause. I mean, there are many things for the other things, but of course everything is started from God as the cause. And also God as the necessary being. So in the universe, we know that there are so many things. So we say this is God. And it goes like this. It goes like this. So these things are moved, so many innumerable things in the universe, and then from these things, many other things, like that. So many things, universe goes like that. But ultimately, everything comes here. Cannot go beyond this. Because this is the first mover, first cause, necessary being. Okay? Not contingent. The God has to exist necessarily. So this is what is called cosmological argument. Based on the cosmology, based on the study of the universe, the nature of the universe, they come up with the idea of cosmological argument to prove the existence of God. In other words, this argument is rests is based on the concept of cause, concept of motion. Now, concept of cause is everywhere. In Buddhism, we also accept Paticcasamuppada, concept of cause. And Paticcasamuppada process, start with avidya paccaya sankhara. Avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana. Now, what do you think? Is avidya like God, first cause? Because avidya is the one that causes sankhara. Sankhara causes vijnana. Vijnana causes namarupa. So in the Paticcasamuppada formula, you have avidya. Now what about avidya? Is it the first cause according to Buddhism? According to Christianity, we say God is the first cause. According to Buddhism, do we say avidya is the first cause? Why not? Why do we say not?
Because that depends on any other aswa.
Pardon me?
Aswa. Any other aswa. Whether
So then asava is the first cause?
aswa also depends on whether.
Actually, it is a very good thing for you to think. I mean, what is the avidya in Buddhism? Is it the first cause? Now, one thing is this. When you look at the cosmological argument, it has a definite beginning. Okay? This is God. And then things move from here. This idea. Okay? Things move from here, this idea. But in the Paticcasamuppada, we use in the word in Pali vatta, sansara vatta. Vatta means vrutta. So it goes like this. Okay? It's a circle. Now important thing is in a circle there is no beginning. There is no end. Okay? Now we say that avidya paccaya sankhara. So it can go in like that. I mean having gone like this, like this, like this, like this again it comes to avidya. Jati jara marana. Avidya. Now why avidya is not the first cause? Actually, no, this important question, because some people looking at this type of argument, they ask whether avidya is the first cause according to Buddhism. Okay? But interesting thing is, in Buddhism, we are not talking about the absolute cause of a universe. One thing is when you talk about avidya, avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana, what are we talking about? We are talking about the sansaric existence of particular person. Now when this argument talks about the universe, how the universe started. But in Buddhism, when we talk about avidya, avidya does not exist outside the human beings. Yeah, my avidya, your avidya, right? But although we talk generally as avidya, avidya doesn't have existence away from human beings. Is that clear? Avidya, each human being has his or her own avidya. Okay? Then Paticcasamuppada is not really trying to explain a universal principle. It explains how a particular person becomes subject to suffering. Okay? Avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnanam, and so on. How people, but then Buddhism doesn't go to explain how human beings came, how human beings originated. But Buddhism talks about human beings, this is the nature of the mind. But Christianity talks about how everything started, how the universe started, how the human beings started. The basic difference, as I understand, is in Buddhism. You remember, Buddhism doesn't talk about beginning of the universe, beginning of the first human being. No, Buddhism doesn't talk. When Buddhism talks about avidya paccaya sankhara, it's each individual person's avidya. Okay? Now otherwise somebody can ask from you, Christianity, they have unmoved mover, uncaused cause, first cause. How about avidya? Is that the first cause? Actually, avidya is not understood in that manner as the first cause. Because the two things is like we are talking in Christianity, the idea is to understand how the universe began. But in Patisamuppada doesn't explain how universe began. Patisamuppada is also not about how human beings began. Then Patisamuppada is what? Patisamuppada is on how suffering of human beings started. Okay? So each individual human being suffering, not really the universe. Okay? Now there is a very important difference between these two things. So when we take the cosmological argument, we have the Christian explanation of how universe began, how universe started functioning, and then from that Christianity tries to establish God exists. Do you get the point? So the cosmological argument is basically based on the idea of cause and the motion and the necessary being. Necessary being is, some being must exist in the universe without relation to other things. Then only it can produce other, the contingent being. So this is the idea. Okay, this is basically the concept of cosmological argument. Okay. Now we move on to the next one, the teleological argument from design. Now it goes from the orderliness of the design of the universe, the author of that orderly universe is deduced. Telos in Greek means end or the purpose. Teleology means to explain some phenomenon by the purpose it serves. The idea behind this view is that God designed this universe, which is very complex and vast, with its apparent order manifested through natural laws, to serve some purpose. Such a universe cannot have arisen by chance. It must have a creator. He is God. Furthermore, natural objects do not have knowledge, but they seem to work toward a goal. There must be some intelligent being behind this activity. That intelligent being is God. Now here, this is called, this another very important the argument in theology. Argument is called teleological argument for the existence of God. Teleology, this word comes from telos. Telos is a Greek word, means purpose. So teleology comes from telos. So teleology, okay, it comes from telos. Telos means purpose. Goal. This has two things. One thing is, this says that the universe has a purpose. Everything in the universe happens for a purpose. It's something like this. Everything in the universe happens for a purpose. So this means the design. Everything in the universe happens for a purpose. Individual things are not aware of the purpose. There must be someone who knows the purpose. God. So this is basically, something like that. The argument is something like that. The idea that in the universe everything has a purpose, everything serves a purpose. If you look at table has we can say purpose, to keep our hands and keep our books. And chair has a purpose for us to sit. Floor has a purpose for us to stand. Building has a purpose for us to be protected by rain and like that, Cloth has a purpose for us to cover. So anything we can say it has a purpose. Like that, they argue that entire universe has a purpose. Entire universe has a purpose. In other words, the idea is that everything in the universe is moving towards some kind of purpose. Now, this goes to the creation of the world. Now, the idea is that God created the world. The question is, why did God create the world? So, the answer is that God created the world. He had some plan. He had some design. Now, that design is meant to be something. Now, you can't say that if you accept God created the world, you can simply ask, why did God create the world? For nothing? No, you can say that God created world for some kind of purpose, to realize some kind of purpose, to achieve some kind of purpose. So for that, God has a design. Design is this world. It's a simple example. This is a in a way, very interesting argument. They say that, suppose you look at this watch. You find this watch. Now, if you look at the watch, you know that watch has a purpose, right? What is the purpose? Tell us the time, right? Watch has a purpose. Now, do you think that this watch comes out of nowhere? No. Somebody designed it, right? Somebody designed it, no? Because it came in somebody's mind first, is that right? So from somebody's mind, it was designed in the computer. But to computer goes from your mind. So you design, and then somebody produced it. Now it says us time. So if you see the watch, the clock, you will not say that it doesn't have a purpose. It has a purpose. You will not say that it doesn't have a creator. It has a creator. Somebody in a industrial complex made it. Okay? So like watch. So we can say that watch was designed by somebody, watch was created by somebody, and watch has a purpose. Right? The purpose of the watch is for us to know the time. Now similarly, Christian theology says that this whole universe has a purpose. When God created the universe, God in his mind had a purpose. Then according to that, God created all of us. So for each of us, also God has a purpose. Now the idea is this, we don't know it, but God knows it. I mean, that is something like, the idea is something like that. Although you are Buddhist monks and learning in Myanmar, but according to this view, God knows what you are doing. Okay? And also God designed it in such a way that you are studying Buddhism in Myanmar these days. But ultimately, when everything moves to the end of the world, you must have served some purpose. So the whole idea of teleological argument is, associated with the purpose. Now, okay, we say that, this is the beginning of the universe, okay, and this is God, and then God created the universe, and this goes like this. And then finally, it comes to an end. So this is the end, okay. Now this is the Christian view. They believe that one day God will come back. It will be the end of the universe. Some of you will be going to hell. I mean, all of you will be going to hell because you are Buddhists. So, okay. So, I'm just joking. So, so some of the people will be going to heaven and everything will be over, right? Everything will be over. Now this is the story. So this teleological story is very interesting. From the orderliness of the design of the universe. What do you mean by this orderliness or design of the universe? Actually, if you look at the world, look at the universe, there is some orderliness, right? I mean, let me give you an example. If you know, okay, this is sun, okay, and then this is what? This we say Mercury, it goes like this, and this is Earth, it goes like this, and this is something else, it goes like this, and this is still bigger one, it goes like this. Now, if you look at these things, this goes only in this orbit, this goes only in this orbit. Now this goes only in this orbit. Who did it? I mean, everything goes perfectly in one circle. Who did it? Earth goes 365 days exactly around this orbit. So the question is, do you think that nobody did it? The argument asks, do you think that nobody did it? Like my example, you look at the watch, the clock. The clock was designed by somebody did it, right? Now clock hands go like this, other hand goes slow, and the second hands of seconds goes faster. Everything was designed. So they say that universe is something like that. Now if you look at the universe, one example is this. And then if you look at our world, now when it comes to December and January, it gets cold here. So this argument asks, who did that? Every year it happens. Some order, right? And then you go to some other countries, Australia, these days is very hot. But you go to Korea or Japan, extremely cold. But every year it is like that. So they say that there is an order in the universe. Now this order is not accidental. Order is purposeful. It is the purpose of God. So you look at this teleological argument, is a very interesting argument. Actually this argument is a very also powerful argument. I have heard that a lot of people who try to convert people to Christianity, they give this argument, they talk about this, look at the world, look at the nature of the world, orderliness of the world. And they ask, do you think it is happening accidentally? No, they say that it is because of God. So anyhow, the idea is that the concept of purpose, God created the universe in order to serve some purpose. So universe moves and universe exists till it serves that purpose. Once the purpose is over, universe will be over. There will be nothing. Maybe God will create again, who knows? But world is over. So everything is moving for a purpose. Actually now the questions I raised, I mean issues I showed you. Today we understand these things differently. This goes exactly in the same orbit, this goes exactly in the same orbit, not change because of the gravitation, right? So now there is a principle to explain this. But in the ancient time, they did not know about the gravitation. But when you look at the universe, things are moving in a perfect manner. So they thought that there must be God who knows everything, who can do anything, must have done this. So this is basically the idea. So you have what is called the teleological argument. Again, from the orderliness or the design of the universe. Orderliness means everything happens in order. In other words, design. Design means it has a purposeful design, shape, like a watch, like a pen, everything has been designed. So these things were designed by people. If so, entire universe has been designed by God. So that's the idea. Telos in Greek means the end or the purpose. End is the final goal, purpose, goal. Teleology means to explain some phenomenon by purpose it serves. The idea behind this view is that God designed this universe, which is very complex and vast, with its apparent order manifested through natural laws to serve some purpose. Now they can say that God created the world and then he set up the gravitational force. So they can say that God did it. So even the gravitation is the work of God. Such a universe cannot have arisen by chance. Now again they will show you the watch. They will say, if you believe that watch happened just accidentally, no. Somebody clearly thought about and designed it, everything, right? So they say that if you think about the watch like that, why do you think about the universe, the world, like without anybody designing it? This world is also designed like that by God. If you believe that watch was designed by somebody, if you look at the world is much more complex than the watch. So they say that there must have been some author, somebody who did it. That person who did it is God, they say. Now the interesting thing is this argument, if you look at carefully, two parts. One part of the argument is to say that the universe is very complex, somebody must have done that. Okay, now you can say yes to it, yeah, somebody must have done it. But then Christian theologians will say that somebody is God. Now that's a different thing. Now even if you accept that God has an author, that author doesn't need to be necessarily God. Okay? But the connection is the problematic. One part of the argument is to prove that there is an author to all these things. Now even if you believe that there is an author, there is no guarantee that that author is God. Okay? But then the issue is that if you say so, then they will say, okay, whoever that author must be God. Because if there is such a person who can design the universe, then that must be God, because God is the perfect. There is nobody higher than God. So by definition, God must be the person who did that. But anyhow, you can see the natural laws based on the nature of the world. You have an argument for the existence of God. And look at the last paragraph. Furthermore, natural objects do not have knowledge, but they seem to work toward a goal. So there must be some intelligent being behind this activity. That intelligent being is God. Now what it means is like this. Now if you take planets, they go around same orbit. But we can't say the planet is conscious. Planet has a mind. But things are moving. Things are moving because God is moving them. Somebody intelligent, somebody thinking. Again, you can take the example from the watch. Now watch, if you wind it or if you put a battery, then things So when you put the battery, those days when we were small, we used to wind it. But there are no winding watches now. So you just use battery. So when you use a battery, you are giving it power. So that till the battery lasts, it works. So it's like that. To the whole universe, God gives the battery. So it works till God wants, something like that. So this is what is called the teleological argument from the purpose. Simply the argument says that universe moved towards a purpose. And that purpose was created, in order to achieve that purpose, God created it. So universe is not an accident. Now that part is very important, because if you say something accident, it's like saying that that watch is accident. Because that thing is a very important thing. Can something be that complex be an accident? That is the argument. Okay, but that's the Christian argument, because something can't be that complex be an accident. So it's something like this. You give a pen and paper to a small child or monkey, just to do this. But is it possible that that child or that monkey will write the whole Dhammapada completely? Logically it could happen. We can't say no. But it's extremely unlikely, right? It is extremely unlikely. But it could happen, because naturally, if you can write one word correctly accidentally, logically you can say you can write 2 words. You can write 4 words, or like that. So logically we can say, but it's very unlikely. So that's why they say that if you look at the universe, this universe is a very complex machine. That machine must have been made by somebody. That's the argument. It can't be something accident. But of course, Venerable, all these things are today explained by science. So if you know science, scientific explanation is there, how the world came into being, okay. Now, when it comes to Buddhism, sometimes people ask, okay, if that is not the case, how was the world created? Now, actually Buddha did not start from that. Buddha said that, beginning, don't worry about it. Now you worry about what has happened to you now. So, the Buddhism start from a different purpose and the different standpoint, okay. But basically you can see that this argument is trying to establish that, how the world started. Okay, so far we started with ontological argument, and then we looked at the cosmological argument. Cosmological argument, 3 different presentations, and then teleological argument or argument from design. So this teleological argument is also called argument from design. Also you can say argument from purpose or argument from design. Okay, there's another argument to prove the existence of God. That's called moral argument. This argument is presented in 2 ways. One is to hold that the moral principles are universal, and such universal moral standards, commands originated from a divine source, which is God. For example, the 10 commandments in Christianity are an example. In ethics, this comes as divine command theory. Okay, so this comes as the other form of this argument comes from the fact that ordinary people are not perfect. Ordinary people are not perfect in their being moral. They possess different degrees of morality. Different degrees of morality have to assume that there is a perfect degree of morality. God has the perfect degree of morality. So this argument from morals is also important argument. Now it comes in 2 ways. One is the hold that moral principles are universal. In the morning we discussed whether moral principles are absolute or relative. Absolute means in a way universal. Universal means moral principles have to be true anywhere, anytime. Okay, that's the idea. Now the Christian view is that moral principles have to be true anywhere, good anywhere, anytime. Now, so the moral principles are universal. Such universal moral standards, commands, originate from a divine being. Now they say that how can something applicable to entire universe be given by ordinary people? No. So if you have a morality that is applicable to entire universe, that morality must have been given by God or a divine being. So this idea. And then example is 10 commandments in Christianity. In the morning I told you, according to the Bible, 10 commandments were given by God to Moses. Moses is one of the early leader of Jewish people. So the 10 commandments were given by God. So the commandments are God's commandment. So God commandments must be applicable anywhere in the world. Okay, that is the idea. From a divine source which is God. The 10 commandments in Christianity are an example. Now when we go to ethics, ethical studies, there is a theory called divine command theory. Divine command theory means the ethics or morality, moral principles are commands by God. Now again in the morning I discussed with you the concept of command. Command is something to be obeyed. So the idea is that God's moral commands are to be obeyed. Now again it kind of very interestingly systematic, because you define God as omniscient, omnipotent and all good. So if God is like that, such a God cannot be giving anything bad. So you don't have to think about too much. You just do what the God says. Okay. So this is the idea. So the moral argument, one presentation of moral argument is that God gives these moral principles and people have to obey. And then you remember I brought out you the story of Jobs. This man, that story comes in the Old Testament, where Job says to God that he did everything correctly, but everything bad happens to him. How? Why is that? He desperately asking this question. I did everything right, but everything is wrong to me. But the idea is this. When God gives the morality, maybe it is like for one or two people like that. That's the idea. But for the whole humanity, or we can argue that it doesn't work for Jobs. God has a purpose. God knows it. But Jobs doesn't understand it. I mean, there can be many answers given like that, because God is all good, omniscient, and so. So the moral arguments presented in this manner. Now the other form of this argument comes from the fact that ordinary people are not morally perfect. So if you take ordinary people, they are not morally perfect. They are not 100% good. Now in order for people to be good in different degrees, they say that there must be some person who is 100% good. Okay? Because ordinary people, all of us are not morally perfect. Now, because we are not morally perfect, in order to make meaningful the concept of moral perfection, we have to have somebody who is 100% moral. So this is the argument from morality in the second form. So God has the perfect degree of morality. Now we move on to the next one. Argument from religious experience. Many religious people claim that they experience God in their religious contemplations. Many religious people claim that they experience God in their religious contemplations. It is said one can experience only that which exists. Since people experience God, God must exist. Or since God exists, people experience Him. Religious experience is direct evidence of the existence of God for those who have that experience. For others, it provides indirect evidence. Now, what is this argument from religious experience? What is this argument from religious experience? Now, somebody can say, when I am meditating or when I am sitting quietly, I experience God, or I saw God, or God talked to me. So, like that somebody can say. Now, what do you think about it? Now, this is a direct experience. Now, if I come and say, I have this experience, I experience God, can you say that, no, you did not? No. Nobody can say that, because it is my personal experience. I say I saw God. Can you say, no, you did not? Because you are not seeing, it is only me, I saw it. So I can say that I experienced God. Now the argument is this: if you experience God, God must exist. If God doesn't exist, you can't experience Him. So the argument goes that way. You experience God, then God must exist. Okay? If God doesn't exist, then you cannot experience God. So the argument from religious experience is, you get a certain type of religious experience, and then you say that you experience God, and therefore God must exist. So the argument from religious experience is also considered to be a proof, or the way to prove the existence of God. Now I will ask you, what do you think about argument from religious experience? Suppose you get some kind of experience. How do you know that it is God? Oh, maybe you saw God, but how can you see God? Now I will ask a very general question. Can you dream? Can you see in your mind something that you have not seen before? Can you see something? Can you dream about something, even in the dream, that's something you have not seen before? It is impossible, I think, because in a dream you see what you have seen in the daytime or in your ordinary life. Sometimes in a dream we see weird things, like the face belongs to somebody, body belongs to somebody, cloth is something, like that, very weird. We have never seen somebody like that. But what is the meaning of that? Actually, that dream is a combination of many things you have experienced in the daily life. Okay? You can see a dream with his face, somebody's body, somebody's clothes, combination. Okay? Now the important issue is this: in any of your experience, can you experience something about which you are not familiar with? Now sometimes you have a picture of God. Then if you have seen the picture, you will see somebody like in that picture. Okay? Now we can say that we can't imagine, we can't think, we can't dream something that we have not experienced before. Okay. But then a Christian religious person will say, no, that is true. But God experience is not something in your mind. God comes and put that into your mind. So you don't have to be familiar with that. It is God's work. If you have the religious experience, they say that it is God. So God is the one who put that. Now if they say like that, then either you have to accept or reject it. Now they say that if you experience God, some experience, that's not you, but that is God. The problem is this: very often what we call religious experience, what we call God is, some kind of experience we got. Say for example, suppose, in one morning you are just seated and you are maybe half asleep or half whatever, and then you see that entire world is something like full of light or something. Okay? Then you think, aha. Now if you are a Christian person, you will say it is God. But if you are a Buddhist, you will say it is the Buddha, or it is Shvedagong, or whatever. Now we interpret what we saw, we give it a name. Now in understanding this, something very important is, there are two stages of our experience. One thing is, let me show you. Whenever we experience something, the experience. The other thing is interpretation. What is the difference between the two? Experience and interpretation. What is the difference between the two? Do you understand the difference? Experience and interpretation. That's not a difficult thing, that's a pretty simple thing. Suppose you see somebody from the distance, you can't really know it, but you say, no, it is X. Now what happened? You have experience, you gave it a name, X. Second part is interpretation. What you see is some person. Even you don't know whether it is a man or a woman. But then you say, aha, I am seeing a human being, man. That's the interpretation, isn't it? You experience something, you see something, you give it a name. So what you see is one thing. What you name or your description is another thing, right? So this is the difference between experience and interpretation. Now as I said, when you are close your eyes and sitting, you see this huge light. Now that is experience. Nobody can say you did not see the light. Okay? But then you say, when you see the light, you say, aha, it is God. Now what is the second part? What is the second part? Now she must be dreaming something. What is the second part? Second part is interpretation. Second part is interpretation, right? You give a name. You had experience, you say it is Shvedagopal. You say it is Buddha. Now in this religious experience argument, I am trying to show you why it is problematic. Because religious people or anybody can get experiences. Like, we can get extraordinary experiences sometime in our life. We see everything is like, the world, we think everything is like illuminated, all kinds of experiences we got. But then, for that experience, how can we say that it is God? It is our interpretation, isn't it? We interpret. So the problem is, the argument from religious experience. Now many religious people claim that they experience God in their religious contempt. It is said that one can experience only that which exists. So they say that you can experience only that which exists. But is that true? If you have seen a picture, you can dream that. You can see it again. But if you have not seen anything in your whole real life, you can never dream about it actually. You can never imagine in your mind. Okay, I mean, if I give a name of an animal, if the animal you don't even have seen in a picture, how can you imagine in your mind? How can you dream? Because dreams are in our mind. I am showing you how you have to, look at this argument. Now the argument says you experience God because God exists. If God is not existing, you can't experience God. But the problem is, how do you experience God? God is like what? Is he like a person? What is it? Now earlier we said God is infinite. God is in the entire universe. Now how do you see God like that? Do you see the entire universe in your mind? Now Venerables, it is very interesting, this argument. They say that since people experience God, God must exist. So the argument goes both ways. Since you experience God, God should exist. Because God exists, you can experience. So argument goes in both ways. If I say that I experience God, so God exists. If there is no something called God, how can I experience? But the funny thing is these experiences are always very personal, private. These very private personal things you can't either prove or you can't disprove. You come and say to me, I had this extraordinary experience. Can I say no? No, because it is you who saw it. And can I say yes? No. You say you saw it, but I don't know. So it is only what you say. Anybody else can't either prove it or disprove it. Do you get the point? If you say religious experience you can't either prove or disprove. Nobody else can do it. You can say that I saw God. But I can ask, how do you know? How do you know it is God? I can ask those questions. But I cannot say that, no, you did not. Because you had some experience. So that's a very personal experience. That's a very personal experience. So nobody can say you did not. So argument from religious experience is that, again, many religious people claim that they experience God in their religious contemplations. It is said that one can experience only that which exists. Since people experience God, God must exist. Or since God exists, people experience. It could go either way. Religious experience is direct evidence of the existence of God for those who have that experience. For example, for others it provides indirect experience. Now this is what the theologians say. But of course, as I tried to show you, if somebody comes up and say, I had a religious experience, I had experience of God, you should look at it carefully. Because experience is very personal, private experience. And in experience, you always have a certain experience and then you give an interpretation to it. Now, you see this object. I see an object. And then you say it is beautiful. That part is your interpretation. I mean, it is beautiful. For somebody else, it's very ugly. Okay? So the interpretation part can be different. For any experience, you can give your interpretation. You see this bench, for somebody it's really cute bench. For somebody else, it is ugly. It's like that. So it's your interpretation, it's okay. But what you see is the same. What you see is the same. It's like this. Early morning, I remember in Sri Lanka, there is a place called Sripada. Buddha's footprint is there, huge mountain. When you go in the very early in the morning, you can see sun rising. Sun rising is very early morning, they say, I have not seen that. They say very beautiful. It comes like this. So Buddhist people believe that sun god worship in the Buddha's footprint. Christians also go there. They think that it is God's. And Muslim people also go there. And they also think it is something. Now you see the same thing, three different people are seeing in three different ways. And a person who doesn't believe in any religion, oh, is sun rising, beautiful. No God or no Buddha or anything. Now you can see, it is one and only thing everybody see, but four different people give four different interpretations. Right? So in the religious experience also it can be. You see something, you say it is God. You see something, you say it is Buddha. So you give the interpretation. Maybe you didn't see the Buddha, other person did not see the God, maybe you had a daydreaming or something, who knows. But you know, interpretation is what you... so this experience and interpretation is an interesting thing, category for you to understand this argument. Next is argument from rationality, Pascal Weger, but I think time is passing, so I wind up from here. Do you have any questions or comments or anything to clarify? Yes, sir. That's fine, go ahead.
As explained by the professor, we have to know about God very much clearly. God created the universe, God created everything. So according to the standpoint of the religion of God, Sri University created by the God.
For some purpose.
Sincerity, our Lord teacher. That's according to the God. God created the civil university. So, who created the God? Firstly, who was the God?
Very good question. And it's a very old question too. God created himself. That's why God is uncaused cause. God is not caused by anybody. According to Christianity, God is the self-cause. God is created by himself. But actually the concept of God is understood to be, God is timeless. That's what they say. So you can't talk about who created God according to their idea. Because God is timeless. Now God created this universe and it moves on and then it gets destroyed. But God is there. Again, if the God wants, God create. Again it goes like this and destroys. So, answering question from Christian point of view, they will say that God is timeless. So, you can't ask who created God because God is there everywhere all the time. I will come. Of course, what is the Buddhist answer? We will discuss sometime. But from the Buddhist point of view, the thing is, who is God is a very important thing. If God creates everything, who created God is also an important thing. But it depends on the definition. The definition given to God as timeless, spaceless, then that problem doesn't arise. But then it is for us to believe whether there is that kind of timeless, spaceless being exists. Yes, sir.
Where is it beyond the word of God?
Well, it depends on the language. Of course, we are using English language here, but in different languages. Actually, one of the early, today in the civilization, the Judaism is very old. So in the Judaic language, I think Judaism concept of Yahweh, this is the concept Judaic religion. Yahweh. And then early Hinduism is Brahman, and then Deva. Deva come from Div. Div means, this is I think Avestan language, Indo-Iranian language. Div means to shine, shining objects. Shining objects are in the sky. That's how they say. So it depends on where you are. But usually these are some of the oldest terms that are used to describe God. God, of course, we are using English language here. Okay, maybe we don't have any more questions. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for listening. We will meet, I think we are meeting on the 10th whole morning and afternoon session. I think Venerable Dhammachara will tell you. We are discussing writing, academic writing, right? So the next week we will be discussing academic writing. Okay, thank you very much.